Thank you so much, Roger. He says that he's delighted. I am even more than delighted to be able to be here and to speak to this amazing series. Because, as he said, I am not a professional of this specific field of sexuality, while my profession is that of art historian. But in my private life, in my private experience, I have always tried to improve my sexuality and my sexual life. And although I've never undertaken any specific path, such as tantra or sex coaching, my wider spiritual path did lead me to face and deal with my own sex life and femininity in general. And I am very passionate about the subject, so I feel very privileged because this is not the sort of environment I am usually in. I feel very privileged to be able to speak to you about a combination of what I know about art. So this talk will be informed by a combination of my own professional specialization, which is art history, and what I have observed and discovered throughout my own personal journey. Before I go on, there's one disclaimer. For this talk, I am deliberately ignoring the social and political connotations of the images I will be using. This could very easily turn into a talk on the male gaze and the objectification of women in art, but that is not my intention tonight. And I would like to put on a side and try, because I think that it is possible, although sometimes challenging, to go past the intellectual knowledge about art and connect to it as an emotional point of reference instead. I am going to briefly say what is going on in the images I will be using, but I will not talk much about what the artists were expressing, nor, most importantly, about the artistic context that determined certain images to look as they do, because I would rather try and share with you how beautiful art can help us connect to our deep desires and identify them as we see them mirrored in the artworks. So, abandonment or passivity. Very often, images of this kind are defined as negative representations of passive women depicted by men for men, and that's all. Now, although this is historically true in the majority of cases, when I see something like this and try and connect to it on an instinctive, emotional level, as I said, keeping on a side what I know about the historical period when it was painted, I see a woman looking intensely at that rain of gold that is just about to fall between her legs. That rain of gold is actually the god Jupiter that transformed itself in golden rain to make love to the woman. Her body, to me, looks abandoned and longing and ready to receive that shower of pleasure. So it makes me wonder, is it really that bad to receive pleasure? Is passivity the only way of describing this condition? I remember once I was listening to someone talking about connection and generosity in sex, and they said, is the other person only a body you masturbate with? And that expression really stayed with me, as I got to discover that sometimes it can happen that the sexual encounter is not a real encounter at all, and one or both partners can actually be on their own without any real exchange taking place. So simply letting someone masturbate with your body, this is what I call passivity, no matter how much one might try to move or take initiative and be apparently active. Simply laying down instead and trying and embracing the joy of receiving pleasure as an active pleasure in a mutual and responsive exchange of love, that can be a very empowering experience, in fact, far from passive, regardless of how it looks. So I think that the fine line between energizing and positive abandonment, as opposed to sad passivity, does not reside in the position, but rather in the exchange and the real encounter that takes place. Now, how about this? Is she passive, or perhaps something more similar to a powerful goddess in a dominating role, enjoying being adored? Now, I used to think that things like submissive and dominating roles in sex could be only unhealthy, like this. Here, we have a rather violent scene that is painted to be at the same time repulsive and attractive. The story here is that there was that king, which is depicted lying on the bed, who had been defeated by his enemy's army, and they were destroying the city. So he decided to destroy all the possessions in his palace and to kill himself at the end before the enemies could take him or his treasures. And his wives, his concubines, were actually part of what he owned. So in the scene, he is there witnessing them being killed because they are being destroyed as part of his possessions. So this is not exactly a sexual painting, but it is a strongly erotic scene. And all combined here, there are pain, beauty, power, but also pleasure, both the reference to the pleasure that these women would have given to the king as his concubines, perhaps on that same bed that is about to become the funeral pyre, and the pleasure of the king as he watches the naked girls being killed. Now, there is something that is actually unhealthy here, and that's the lack of consent, that because the women are not entitled to have their own free will, they can't express, they can't decide whether they want or not to be involved in that deadly game. But in safe and healthy environments instead, there can be the possibility of exploring power in ways that are erotic and positive, and it can be attractive, a very creative or even liberating experience to freely and joyfully choose to surrender your will to your partner for a while, as long as both partners are actually owning their own power and deciding how to use it, as I think this piece beautifully represents. To me, nothing here suggests an imbalance of power in the relationship, as in the previous case, but there is instead the exploration of an intense, strong passion, or at least I perceive a wonderful tension in the position that the two partners have decided to assume, both of them choosing and enjoying their respective and temporary roles. This piece has the ability to really capturing me, and the more I look at it, the more I perceive the strength of the vibe it represents. Complicity. Once more, this is all about connection, which I have come to realize is a rather central element for me. I don't know if it's probably a little bit too dark, but you could be able to look at the gaze between the two people, the two young people on the left. Perhaps you can appreciate better the girl's gaze because the boy's face is a little bit dark. But the way in which they look at each other, that intense longing in their eyes, as well as the body language, to me this is one of the most sensual images. And just like the previous one, it gets stronger the more I look at it. The whole painting depicts the three ages of man, with the babies here representing infancy, the couple, adult life, and the man in the background with the scores, the last stage of life. To represent adulthood, then, the center of our lifespan, Titian shows desire, as if that is the epitome, the thing that can exemplify the full expression of our life. As if to say that to experience this level of intimacy, connection, and desire, even if just for one afternoon in the fields, can contain in itself the peak of life. Just to clarify, I'm not saying that this is what Titian meant to say, but this is what I get from the painting, the feeling of something supremely worthy of being explored, so much so that it could represent adulthood altogether. There have been times when it was easy for me to tell myself that I wanted too much in relationships, and that it was actually okay to have lukewarm levels of intimacy. But art, such as this, has always been there for me to remind me that actually no, it is not okay, and that there can be something like this to be experienced if I allow myself to do so. And then humor. I haven't mentioned fun so far, but that's very important, both in art and in sex. So the man on the grass there is the man who asked the artist to paint this image, who commissioned it, giving precise instructions as to what it had to represent. There had to be him lying on a flowery grass, gracefully looking up to a woman who was his mistress, that had to be represented as she also gracefully swung in the air. Now the artist really mastered the perfect angle of the swing curve with the woman's leg stretching out just right and the wind blowing the dress, so that the patron paying for the painting is represented as he is actually enjoying the most delightful view from below. And again, leaving on a side the possible considerations about how equal the real relationship between these two people could have been, the painting is wonderful in its subtle eroticism and great irony. It speaks of the fun of courtship, the charm of things that are suggested but not really revealed, and the sexiness of enjoying all the stages of the game. And I think it's wonderful to remember that all these aspects are part of the intimate life, and learn again to appreciate and to really slow down. So this is all for me, and I think art is such a wonderful source of knowledge, and I love that, but it can also help us really recognize those things that genuinely resonate with us, such as connection, abandonment, fun, freedom of choice, and the desire for nothing less than deep, meaningful experience, so that our intimate life, this is me in the meantime, our intimate life can be full of artistic inspired joy. Next time you're in an art gallery, I hope you might want to try and get inspired too. Thank you.